Good morning. I'm very sorry about that. I was in search for water, and I realized it was at the table the whole time. So I apologize. I'm very honored to be here. I know that it's always, for me, my work, the most important part of my work is on the ground with populations that are not doing so well, with populations that need support, populations that need resources. But I often like to take a break and work with stakeholders because I think it's important to bring about change from the bottom up and also, of course, from the top down. We work in institutions that are loosely coupled, meaning that when we implement policy from the top down, we can expect for that policy not to work so well because when educators enter the classroom, they close the door and they end up practicing whatever it is that they're used to practicing. They end up enmeshing themselves in the culture that they're used to being part of. And so that's why we often, I think, as leaders, reach a level of frustration when we tell people, oh, okay, our work now is going to be about equity. It's going to be about cultural responsiveness. And the response is often, okay, sure. And we go into the classroom and we realize that maybe some of these practices are not being practiced correctly. That there's a misunderstanding in what we mean by cultural responsiveness. So for example, every few years there's a new trend for a new approach, whether it's a growth mindset, whether it's cultural relevance, or what is it? Is it cultural relevance, cultural proficiency, or cultural responsiveness? And I'm willing to bet that a lot of folks out there, right, in your institutions don't know the difference between the three, right? But at the end of the day, though, good teaching is good teaching. And there's an entire science behind sort of why we do the SEL stuff, why we connect with people at an emotional level. There's even neuroscience I'll allude to in the presentation that talks about how emotion is so intricately tied at a neurological level, so intricately tied with the learning process, with academic outcomes. So convincing our people, right, that emotional support, it goes beyond just sharing our stories. So earlier with my shoulder partner, I like that term, by the way, I got to learn about his family's background. And you got to learn a little bit about me. And then it felt better to be at that table. It felt like I knew someone at that table, right? It felt familiar. And that's another theme of the talk, right? That there's a familiarity that has to be created not just between teacher and student, but between teacher and teacher, and of course then between schools and parents. That parents have to feel that there is a family connection between them and the school. And one of the things I often talk about when I'm at schools is checking in to see that parents whose kids get in trouble, that the school rolls out the red carpet for that parent when they arrive. And it's counterintuitive sometimes, but the reality is that that parent is not in trouble, the child's in trouble. And the reality is that that parent is a team member in the process of working with the student to improve that student's outcomes. And that the school has a responsibility to make parents feel welcome. And that for many of these parents, that might be the only time you see them at school when their child's in trouble. And later on I'll talk about the sort of, there's a cultural reason behind it too. A cultural reason, but through an asset-based perspective. But before I continue, I do want to show you a little short video clip talks about a little bit of my own personal journey.
Now, another in our series on the nation's high school dropout crisis. Tonight, one man's journey from gang member and dropout to professor, and his efforts to keep other young men from making his mistakes. Ray Suarez has our American graduate story.
My name is Victor Rios. In 1994, this was me. I was introduced to the nation in a Frontline documentary. I was a gang member, a juvenile delinquent, and a high school dropout.
But in the 18 years that followed, Victor Rios earned his high school diploma, finished college, earned a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley, and wrote 2 books on his life and his research on juvenile delinquency. He now teaches sociology at UC Santa Barbara and helps at-risk youth navigate the perils of adolescence.
I'm sure you're closer to some people than others.
Rios is also a family man with a wife, Rebecca, and 3 children. Life is constantly busy.
To be this far into the future, I feel like I've lived 2 lifetimes. So this idea of 2 lifetimes, by the time that some of the children that enter your schools, by the time they're 8 years old, 9 years old, some of them have already lived an entire lifetime. Some of them have already had to fend for themselves, become adults at such a young age, figure out where the next meal for the family is coming from if they're living in poverty. I'll give you the example of my brother. He was 7 years old, I was 3 years old, and in the summertime there was no summer daycare for us, so my mom would leave to work and lock the door from the outside. And so this 7-year-old, for 10 hours a day, would have to make sure he entertained the 3-year-old, made sure the 3-year-old was fed, and made sure the 3-year-old didn't fall out of that 2nd-story window. That's a big responsibility for a child. And so when my brother enters school, you can see that maybe his priority is more so on fending for his family and looking out for his little brother than in learning academics. So educators have the power to provide a second chance at another life opportunity. That yes, you might have to be an adult out in that community, in that world you're growing up in, because we can't really control structural barriers. But when you come into our institutions, you have permission, and we encourage you and we empower you to be a child and enjoy all of the rights, the human rights and the human dignity that comes along with being a child. Being able to sing like those beautiful children did earlier, being able to have joy, being able to not feel like someone's going to yell at you, scream at you, re-traumatize you, because that's happening in our schools. We know that. Across the nation, we know the statistics are there that for young black and brown boys in particular, and increasingly African American girls and Latina girls, are seeing not a decrease, an increase in expulsion, suspension, detention, being set up for what some of us call the school-to-prison pipeline. No. And I know there's programs out there. I was just in Houston where they implemented a restorative justice program for the entire district. They hired 20 full-time staff for the district to implement restorative justice. So the pendulum is swinging, but there, again, you can have top-down policy, but unless it enters the culture, the teaching culture, the school culture, the classroom culture, we're not going to see a lot more change. Because you'll continue to have people close their doors and yell at children, close their doors and kick children out of class, close their doors, and without knowing it, many times, without knowing it, right, treat children with racial indifference. So my story begins when I'm very little. I was born in Mexico, and I never got to meet my father. He abandoned us before I was even born. And my mom, she struggled. She really wanted to get us a better life, a better opportunity. She worked full time, and even so, you know, I remember being a little toddler and crying a lot at night because I was hungry. And I remember hearing stories about how much we struggled. And one day my mom's talking to her tia, to her aunt, and her aunt tells her, "Mija, you have to go to a land of opportunity, a place where nobody goes hungry, a place where you get there and you work hard, you can own a big house with a swimming pool." Do you know what land of opportunity this lady was talking about? Canada? Los Estados Unidos, the United States of America, the land of opportunity. Now, I don't know what kind of TV shows this lady was watching or what she was smoking, but my mom believed her. So she took us to the border, tried to get us across. It didn't work. She had a third-grade education, no skill set. We ended up on the streets of Tijuana, Mexico. We were homeless. We were hungry. I had to stick my little hand out begging people for money so we can eat. And desperate times call for desperate measures. My mom one day got so frustrated, she grabbed my brother by the hand, put me on her hip, took us through some desert streams, behind some desert bushes, over some desert hills, for what seemed to be hours and hours and hours. And finally, we made it to Los Estados Unidos, the land of opportunity, the land of resources. So, got some water, thank you so much. And so when we got here, we're thinking my mom's going to work hard, we're going to have that American dream that we see on television. We ended up in a beautiful city. This city, you would go to the downtown of this city and it had a big tower with a clock on it. And it was a four-way clock. So anywhere you were downtown and you look up, you could tell what time it was. This city was Oakland, California. The city of dreams for us. The city of opportunity. The city where we were going to make it. And my mom, she got a job. But her boss told her, "I'm going to pay you whatever I want. And if you tell anyone I'm paying you below minimum wage, I'm going to call immigration so they can send you back to Mexico." So my mom was getting exploited as a laborer. We see that time and time again with a lot of our families who are exploited for their labor, who are working 10, 12 hours a day or 2 shifts, Or they might be working all day long and then driving an Uber or a Lyft at night just to try to make ends meet for the family. Especially in this new economy we're in, the gig economy. So seeing our families get exploited, and then at the same time, how do we translate that into an asset perspective to the children that are part of these families that are getting exploited, or they're having to work hard, or they're blue-collar, working class? We might say to them, "Listen, one thing I know about you and your family is that you have a hard work ethic. And my job as an educator, my job as an education institution is to help you translate that hard work ethic into a smart work ethic." Right? That the working class, one thing we can guarantee from them is that they'll bring the hard work ethic, and then now it's our job to use that asset that they bring, right, to turn it into an intellectual work ethic as well. And they go hand in hand. Once it clicks for these children, it complements itself very, very well. So we're in this messed up environment. My mom, she got us this apartment, but it's pretty nasty. It's full of cucarachas crawling everywhere. I don't have to translate cucarachas, do I? Cockroaches, And then we had rats. They were pretty big rats with long tails. And You know, we told the landlord about these rats and these roaches, and he wouldn't do anything about it. And then when the crack addicts would break our window to steal the little things that we did have, the landlord wouldn't replace a new window. He'd put up a piece of plywood. And sometimes we couldn't pay the electricity bill, so we had an orange extension cord from the neighbor's house just to have one light bulb. So, you know, the situation got so bad. One time, I'm growing up in this environment. My little cousin, he's 2 months old. He's sleeping in his crib. Middle of the night, his mom was asleep, and the rats came. They crawled on his crib, and they began to chew his face up. They chewed his lips, his gums, his cheeks. By the time that his mom gets up and turns on the light and realizes what's going on, this little baby's in a pool of blood. My little cousin, he had to go to the hospital for a couple months. His little face had to get fixed. And by this time, I'm in 8th grade, and I tell myself, man, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to be poor. So it was at this stage in life that I decided to drop out of school and get a job. But we all know what an 8th grade dropout gets for a job. Not many opportunities. I end up pushing lawnmowers, thinking I'm going to be rich one day by pushing lawnmowers. I end up at rich people's houses, pushing lawnmowers 10 hours a day, making $1 an hour, $10 a day, and still with an illusion that one day I'll make enough money to buy my mom the house she always deserved, and make enough money to help her pay the bills, and make enough money to take that girl out on a date. And I guess the point here is that sometimes, right, you have an 8th grader with this big illusion, and you encounter children that have big illusions, or your educators encounter children that have big illusions, and sometimes the attitude is frustration from the educator. Sometimes it's like, how can they think that way? How can they not have some common sense and think that a menial job will get them far in life? And the point here is that we have to have a developmental approach to education. That some children, particularly the ones that encounter high adversity at young ages in life, may end up showing up with an illusion about how they're going to live their life in the future. They may end up showing up with thought patterns, with mindsets that we think are not following common sense. And instead of being so pushy and frustrated, right, and on the offense about these people not having the common sense to plan a future for themselves, it is our job to approach them at a developmental level and say, hey, I know right now, developmentally, both psychologically and socially, you're right here, but I'm projecting that your future is going to be over here. You just can't see it right now. So the job of an educator then is to project an image of a future that's bright, that this child and their family may not have the time, resources, or energy to imagine at this moment. So, after working a couple months pushing lawnmowers, my mom finds out I'm out of school, and she's frustrated. You know, she wants me to get through school, and she tells me, I don't want you to help me with the bills. I want you to go back to school. Another misconception that happens, and it's because researchers for over 50 years have come up with this idea that Latino culture doesn't value education, that black culture doesn't value education. There's been study after study after study about this. New studies, though, are showing that these families, these cultures value education, that sometimes, and it has to do with class, right? Sometimes when you're working class, you may not have the resources to demonstrate to the system that you value education. And so how do we become translators? Right? Two parents who want to value education, who show a value of education, might not have the resources to actually participate. So we have to meet them halfway. So my mom sends me back to school, but by this time I'm getting caught up in the street life. I'm hanging out with the wrong crowd. I end up going in and out of juvie. I end up stealing cars, getting caught for grand theft auto. And I got caught once, and that first time I get caught, I get put in this juvenile facility, and the officer says to me, "Hey, we're going to teach you a lesson." And I'm 14 years old, so I'm thinking, like, bring it on. What lesson you got for me? And so he throws me, I'm 14, and he throws me in a cell with a 17-year-old. And the 17-year-old, you know, developmentally, right? A 17-year-old is much bigger, more mature than a 14-year-old. So the 17-year-old's really big. He has a beard. And I'm in the cell, and I'm terrified. He's supposed to beat me up. That's the lesson I'm supposed to learn. And so I'm in the cell with him, and I'm in the corner like this, and he says, "Hey, man, what you in here for?" "Oh, man, I stole a car." "What kind of car?" Like, "Oh, I stole this little, like, old Toyota, man, like a Tercel, you know, like an old 82 Tercel." And he's like, "Man, you stupid. You need to be stealing high-performance vehicles." I'm like, "I don't know how to do that." He goes, "I'll teach you." So the system taught me a lesson. You see, in the pursuit to be old school about teaching children a lesson, both in education but other institutions, right, we've seen a backfiring. Right, this child, you know, is challenging me. I'm going to challenge the child back. You know, this child is falling asleep in class. I'm going to yell at them. You know, chances are that that classroom is the only safe space they're feeling they can lay their head down. And by us yelling at them, we're just re-traumatizing them. Right? So this developmental approach allows us to open up windows at school of healing, windows at school of academic achievement through, first and foremost, an emotional pathway. Academic achievement through, first and foremost, an emotional pathway. So, I didn't learn my lesson from the system, but I learned my lesson from my friend. He eventually became my friend, taught me how to steal. You know, he told me to go get a big, long screwdriver when I got out of juvie, and that long screwdriver would break the steering column of any, like a Camaro Z28 IROC, and then I could pull a rod on the steering column, and I would have myself a high-performance vehicle. And that's what I did. And I got caught again. And I came out, and I didn't learn my lesson. I got caught again. That wouldn't have been a good career for me because I kept getting caught. And I'm not proud of it, but I'm telling you this to show that the system still has a 70% recidivism rate, meaning that once a kid enters, 70% of those kids that enter will be back again. And it starts with schools, folks. We're all interconnected. Oh, they're the juvie, facility, and they're the law enforcement institution, and we're the education institution. Guess what? Whether we acknowledge it or not, we're all one system. A system that's either punishing, criminalizing, labeling, or a system that's supporting. A system that is providing a holistic approach where we all come together. Right? And this is in your 4 core principles that you're focused on. Right? Providing sort of a wrap-around approach, right, to empower the students that you serve. So what does that look like? That means that the officer, the social worker, the parent, we hold everyone accountable, by the way, right? The educator, the front office staff is all on the same page about how we're going to interact with children and their families in a positive way. So I didn't learn my lesson. I'm back on the streets, and one day I go to the other side of town to visit some girls that my friend and I met, and a group of our enemies are walking towards us, and my friend, he told me, hey man, we better go, we're going to get beat up. And I said, no, we have to stay, because if we don't stay, they're going to say we're cowards. So we better just, even if we get beat up, stay here and throw down. So these guys came up to us. We started fighting. Fists are flying everywhere. I fell down. I got back up. Fists are flying out everywhere. I fell down. I didn't want to get back up. And that's when it happened. They pulled out a gun. I started running. My friend, he started running. I heard gunshots. Boom, 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 boom. I hid between two cars. I'm looking for my friend. I see these guys running away, but I don't see him. I turn around the car, and I see his feet. I get a little closer. He had been shot, and he died. And at this point in my life, I didn't know who to turn to. My mom, she was too busy working, dealing with her own problems. Police thought I was a criminal. And I'm sitting at 2 in the morning in front of a liquor store, debating whether I'm going to end up dead or in prison. And all of a sudden, I hear this voice from the one adult in my life that had once told me she would be there for me. This was my teacher, Miss Russ. Miss Russ was the kind of teacher that was always in your business. She was the kind of teacher that had that annoying smile all the time. She's the kind of teacher that you didn't appreciate because you were too young to know better. And one time I cussed her out. She kicked me out of class. She said, you're not ready. Right now, you're not ready. And as I was leaving the door, I thought she was going to tell me what every other teacher had told me in the past. She said, Victor, and I turned around and I gave her a mean mug. And she had that annoying smile on her face. And she said, right now you're not ready, but when you're ready, I'll be here for you. And I said, whatever, and I left. Other teachers, right, the alternative mindset is, don't let the doorknob hit you on the you-know-what on the way out. In other words, don't come back. Don't come back. So as leaders, we need to train our educators not to stoop to the developmental level of our children. I'll say it again. We should never stoop to the developmental level of our children. We now know that the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reason, doesn't even fully develop until you're about 24 years old. So if there's a 17-year-old child, developmentally, that's still a child, right, that makes a mistake, we should not say, hey, that kid cussed me out. I don't ever want to see him in my class again. Instead, we should say, hey, he cussed me out. He needs to learn from that, make amends, and we need to start over. And I need to be part of the teaching moment, of the teaching opportunity. And I know there's educators out there that do that, and there's educators out there that don't. And so we have to make sure that our educators know that we're taking a developmental approach, and that through that mindset, we have to constantly be there for children to go through not just academic mastery learning, but social mastery learning. So we know about mastery learning, right? It's another new trend that's important, that you just keep trying until you pass that test. And you master that material, and then you move forward. Well, social mastery learning would be, well, we're going to keep trying at this until you're able to not cuss someone else when there's conflict, because we're teaching you conflict resolution. So I go visit my teacher, and I'm walking down the hallway, and she notices I'm outside of her class, and she comes out and she says, Victor, are you okay? I heard what happened about your friend. And I'm trying to be tough, so I'm just like, yeah, I'm all right. And right when I'm being tough at that very moment, but vulnerable, this lady taps me on the shoulder and she says, I know you're not okay. And right when I felt her touch on my shoulder, all my pain, all my fear, all my anger began to grow, and I began to cry like a little kid in front of the whole school during passing hour, 3,000 students. And in that moment, this tough guy wanted to just melt away with his tears and just drain into the gutter. And you know what this teacher did? She opened her arms up, she gave me a hug, and she said, Victor, I am here for you. If you're ready to change your life around, I'll be here for you, but you have to do the work. You see, leaders, another important thing to teach our educators is that to give children a second chance, a third chance, an opportunity to make amends is not giving them a free pass. It's holding them accountable through positive emotional support. Right? She's telling me, I'm going to help you, but you got to do your part too. And sometimes we think, oh, you know, every school site I visit, I always ask, hey, where are the teachers in the room that the other teachers send the challenging students to? And they all start pointing. Oh, there he is. Oh, there she is. And there's usually a little cluster of them, right? Like 3, 4 of them, depending on how big the school is. And then I say, they should, number one, they should be up here training everyone, right? Because we should be learning best practices from our own educators organically. And number 2, it should be all of us that are working with at-promise students, not just the ones we could, throw the students at, because then they burn out. They're great colleagues, but guess what? They burn out, or they make them administrators, right? So, little by little, with the help of Miss Russ, I start doing better in school, catching up with my credits. And even though I had missed out on 2 semesters of school, she worked with me. She told me that I needed to make amends with all the teachers that I didn't get along with. That's a lot of teachers. But that was part of the learning process. So I made amends with those teachers. They started to help me and support me. And eventually, with the help of my teacher, I graduated from high school on time and with my class. Thank you. And then I said, man, after all I've been through, I want to do something good, like a career. And then she says, well, what do you want to be? I said, I don't know, like a mechanic. Like I was dreaming right here, because, I'm on top of the world. Because with a high school diploma, right, my mom has a 3rd grade education. So for me, this is all I need. And so she said, Victor, right around graduation time, planning for it, I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it. Now it's time to go to college. College me, man, what is this teacher smoking thinking? I'm going to college. And then she took a little sheet of paper and itemized my monthly spending 10 years from now. My mortgage, my car payment. She says, you want children? I said, yeah, I want lots of kids. Costco runs for diapers and formula. She's like, well, this is how much you need to make to live the life you want. And then she took Department of Labor statistics to show you what a high school graduate makes and what a four-year graduate makes. And in that moment, I had an epiphany. This is the translation I'm talking about. The translation to the working class is a little different than the translation to the middle class, and I'll show just a few glimpses of the research in that arena we've been doing. She translated for the working class in this moment, like, now, in that moment, I had an epiphany, a light bulb, and I said, boop, now I have to go to college. So I apply to college, I get a letter. A few months later, congratulations, you've been admitted to California State University. It was a special program for kids that were in poverty, for kids that had struggled and faced adversity, for kids that needed guidance, mentoring, a comprehensive approach to the student. And at the time, I didn't know what academic probation was. I only knew one kind of probation. So it said, you've been admitted under academic probation. I said, probation? I'm already on probation. That don't matter. I thought some guy with a can of mace was going to be following me around campus, making sure I wasn't trying to jack people. Again, developmentally, I'm 18 years old, and I'm still not thinking through what we would consider in our middle-class value system in a common sense way. So let's get rid of this idea, right, among our educators that there is a common sense way to think, and rather that there's only developmental ways of thinking that eventually when you have a child confronting you, challenging you and saying, I don't like school, I'm not going to graduate, forget you, teacher, that teacher sees it not personalized, not embodied, but rather that teacher sees it as, hey, right now you might not be thinking that way, but maybe later you will. And here's the roadmap for that way of thinking. Right? It's like when I told her, I'm not going to college, she laughed at me. She's like, yeah, you are. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. Okay, I guess I am. Right? Okay, so Miss Russ would always say, I don't teach subjects, I teach students. And I know there's educators out there and leaders out there that believe that the child comes first, that the human comes first, that dignity comes first, and then the academic part comes next. How long did it take for us to do that SEL activity? 5, 6 minutes? It didn't take long, did it? So I tell my STEM teachers, they're like, oh, but that's like, in English, you can talk about this stuff. But in math, right, you can't. I'm like, you're right. But what you can do is, and we've seen the science in the headlines just in the last couple of weeks, greet students at the door with a smile every time. 20% higher achievement when that happens. Those big studies have just come out on this. But you can do a 5 to 6 minute SEL opening and then get to the math. A mindfulness, hey, let's be here right now in this room. Right? Not on your phones, right? Not in what happened last night, not in what, that boy told you earlier about prom. Let's be here right now, present. And you go through a 5 to 6 minute mindfulness exercise. Right? So there are ways to do it in the STEMs as well, right? And they're not just STEMs, they're STEAM. Or now I think it's like STEAM, right? Science, technology, engineering, emotion, art, mathematics. The emotion should be in there. That's why I call it STEAM. Okay. So what do schools think when they see pictures like this? That's me hanging out with my crew back in Oakland as a teenager. I'm throwing up the sign. I'm in the very bottom with a white hat and all black. And then there's some boys I studied for one of my books, right? One of them has a bottle of Hennessy. Another one has a blunt in his mouth. They're throwing up gang signs. So we think of them as at risk. Right? Society thinks of them as at risk. We use that word very commonly. It's in our education code in some states. It's in our programs, in the community. And instead I propose at promise. Because what you label someone determines how you would treat them. So if you label me a risk, your sort of perspective on the solution will be risk-based. So we have to implement in our schools with our educators language, programming, curriculum, ideas that go from a threat perspective to an asset perspective. And that when we hear each other talk about families, communities, cultures, children through a deficit or threat perspective, that we simply remind each other, oh, actually, we talk about them as at promise or at hope or whatever it is you develop here, right, in this region. But and why is that important? Because our mental schemas as policymakers now and program developers, when we sit at a table and we start from a threat perspective, a deficit perspective, the material is going to be deficit. And you see it everywhere. You see it. You know programming. You see programming. Oh, that's we could sit all day long and look. That's deficit. Oh, that's asset. How many of you know trauma-informed approaches, use trauma-informed approaches? Wonderful. I think it's a great program. I think it has the whole, that wraparound approach that we need. I think it has a healing approach. I think it's usable in different contexts. I just have a little tweak for the title, right? Because if I'm a traumatized child, that's not my only identity. I'm also a happy child. I'm also a thriving child. I'm also a ready-to-learn child, right? So maybe what we could call it is emotion-informed approaches, and that gives us the full spectrum of human emotion rather than just the trauma that we bring as the contribution to the school. Yeah. So because of someone like you, an educator, I found a key, and that key was to an education, but you can shout it out. What key did the help of my teacher provide for my future? Key to what? Shout it out. Hope, opportunity, success, life, confidence. I'll tell you what key my education provided me. After undergrad, I applied to Berkeley for a PhD, got accepted. It takes 7 years at UC Berkeley to finish a PhD. That's normative time. But I was so convinced that I wanted to be done quick and be there for my family and community that I worked really hard while working full-time, and I ended up finishing my PhD in a short amount of time. In the year 2005, just 4.5 years after I started grad school, I became Dr. Victor Rios. Thank you. So I graduate Berkeley on a Sunday. On a Monday, I'm at the bank asking for a home loan. Working class. The working class. And this is the opportunity you have as an educator, right? It's to provide, right, opportunities for financial stability. The working class needs financial stability. So I go and get a home loan, purchase a house. A couple months later, the whole process unfolds. I get the key. I go to my mom's apartment, and she lives in that dilapidated apartment where you walk up the stairs, the whole apartment rocks because it's termite infested. And I knock on her door. She opens the door. She gives me, You know that smile a mom gives you after she hasn't seen you in a while? Ah, ¿qué pasó, mijo? How you doing, son? And I'm nervous. My leg is shaking. I put my hand in my pocket and I said, Mom, I'm sorry you had to wait 30 years for this, but here are the keys to your house. And the only person I kept thinking about this whole time is like that allowed me this opportunity, the one person in my life that allowed me to get this far, to be able to get a home loan, was my teacher. No one else. Right? Of course, I did the work, but she gave me the encouragement, empowered me to do that work. So because of someone like you, an educator, I went from someone that could have been dead or in prison to someone that was able to contribute to my family and eventually my community. So I call this process educator projected self-actualization, where you as an educator and your educators back at your home institutions will project for a child a future that they haven't even begun to imagine. And so Miss Rush, she met me when I was that kid throwing up gang signs, and that's who I was, but she saw me as this guy on the right, which is on stage. But I'd never imagined myself that way. And one day as I was getting ready to graduate, she says, Victor, one day you'll meet presidents. I already know presidents. President of the Latino Club, president of the Student Leadership Club. She's like, no, not high school presidents. U.S. presidents. Miss Rush, you crazy. 22 plus years later, I get invited to the White House to advise the Obama administration on gun violence and policing in America. I'm sitting at the Eisenhower building for 4 hours talking to his domestic policy council, daydreaming out the window. There's the Oval Office. Obama will come out and come say hello. He never did. Then that evening, I got tickets to go to this White House lawn dinner. So, I'm working class. So, the working class, you give us one invitation, we bring a lot of people. So I brought my wife, I brought my daughter Nina, my daughter Maya, and my son Marco. And they wouldn't let us in, so I had to ask them, please, can you four more people? They let us in. We're sitting there talking, hanging out, different Congress people, It's like, man, this is incredible. All of a sudden, President Obama comes out. He comes up to everyone, starts shaking hands. He comes up. I'm holding my son. He comes up to my son. My son was 4 at the time. He says to my son, give me 5. Don't leave me hanging. And in that moment, I'm staring at Obama right here, face to face, and I'm thinking, Miss Russ, you really are crazy. A month later, I'm at Joe Biden's house having dinner for Latino Heritage Month. I couldn't believe it. And he's talking to me about one of my books, and I'm just like, how does this happen, right? That a teacher can project for you something like this, and you can't even imagine it till you're actually there. So I was so nervous, I went to the bathroom. And they got these cool little paper towels, you dry your hands with. And they got the seal of the Vice President of the United States. I'm like, wow, this is nice. So I dry my hands. I open up my sports coat. I put a little stack in here. Get on my flight back to Cali. Can't believe I'm saying this on camera, by the way. I hope you edit this part. So you can take me out of Oakland, but you can't take Oakland out of me, huh? No, but that's the reality of education, right? And an educator. That sometimes you are the final frontier of hope. That's it. That's all we got. And teachers will always tell me, hey, Dr. Rios, but I'm not a social worker. And I said, I understand that. But there's a way within that 50 hours that you already work a week. I'm not asking you to add one more hour of work. Within that 50 hours that you just adjust and reflect on your approach. And the questions are simple. Am I treating every child I see and their family in a positive light on a daily basis? And there's measures for that. The greeting at the door, the smiling, the rolling red carpets out for parents, the telling them, I believe in you. So I'm going to leave you with an activity to give, and it's on my website. You can also download it, to give to your educators. It's a great activity because you really reflect on purpose. Why did you go into education to begin with? And they get your educators really talking about their core principle for why they're there. And they'll say things like, because the teacher saved my life and now I want to save lives. And you're like, whoa. Or they'll say, because the teacher told me I'll never amount to anything and I'm here to prove them wrong. Right? Or they'll say, because I had no one in my life and now I want to be there for children that have no one in their life. And in the middle of the school year, this activity is amazing because as educators start to burn out and start to say, is summer here yet? And it's barely January. You can roll this out and have them kind of refresh themselves and remember their purpose. So it's a great activity to use with educators. It's really fruitful, productive activity. So how can our purpose support the well-being of our students? Now we know that we're in education not for the money, because on average we have more credentials than your average corporate worker, right? An average educator has about 5 years of education. Corporate worker has an average of 4 years of education. Though a corporate worker averages 20% more income than an educator, so the educator's not here for the money, they're here for the purpose. So, there's a little store by the name of Trader Joe's. Any of you been to Trader Joe's? You like Trader Joe's? Their customer service is ranked #1 by Forbes. Happiest customer in America. Guys are always, cash register, always smiling at me. I buy asparagus one day at 5 o'clock. My blood sugar is low. I'm grumpy. And the guy's like, how you doing today, sir? I'm good. Sir, what are you going to do with this asparagus? I'm not going to tell you what I imagined I was going to do with that asparagus. But I was being mean. Are you ever purposefully mean? You kind of don't realize it, but you do. I'm going to cook it. Like, leave me alone, dude. I don't want to talk right now. Like, I want to get home. Sir, this is what you do. When you get home, you put this olive oil on a saute pan on medium heat, and you wait for that olive oil white smoke to rise, sir. And that's how you know the olive oil is ready. And then when the white smoke is rising, sir, you throw your asparagus in there. Just 2 minutes, sir. You stir it around a little bit. Crushed sea salt and crushed black pepper, sir. Turn off the flame, and you'll have an exquisite asparagus. By this time, I'm smiling, man, like, whoa, thank you, man. Just made my day. And I left. Then I came back. I said, hey, man, don't you get tired of being nice to people all day? He's like, no, sir, because that's my job. Imagine if every educator in America were to really buy into the idea that being nice to their children, the families, but also the colleagues and the staff, was their job. But in order for them to be able to do that, you have to be nice to them all the time, too. Because the guy, you know what the guy told me? He points to the bullpen where all the managers hang out, and he goes, and they're always nice to me, too. So isn't it the irony that in the year 2018, we have to look at corporate models for an example on how to treat our students right? And some schools are doing it great. But those of you that might want some ideas on it, how about the Trader Joe's Challenge? I know it's cheesy. I know it's corporate. But that's one example, right? Okay, so just a couple minutes of some of the literature and research, and then I'll conclude. Is that okay? Okay. So, and this is, you don't have to take notes in detail because this is, PowerPoint is on my website. You can download it, and it'll have all this information. And my website's listed on that handout you have, okay? All right. So support from authority figures was the strongest predictor of school-appropriate behavior, positive attitudes towards school, and academic performance. So emotional support is key to student motivation and transformation. This is a survey we conducted of 1,879 high school students. Low-income students thrive more on emotional support than informational support. Middle-class students actually thrive more on informational support than they do on emotional support. Here's an example of informational support. Hey students, it's college application time. I got all the material here. The deadline's November 31st. Good luck. Let me know if you need anything else. That's wonderful. College going culture, the teacher's giving them info, went and found it. Beautiful. Resource, resource, resource. Here's the emotional support part in that instance. Hey students, college application time is coming up. The deadline is November 31st. Every single one of you in here has the potential to make it to college and to graduate. I believe in you. And if you need anything, you just let me know. Which one sounded better? The latter. And did it take me a lot? Did I exert a lot more effort and energy? Not so much, maybe a little drama, but not a lot, right? And some educators, they're like, oh, I'm more of an introvert. I don't got the kind of like tap dance thing that you got going on. I'm like, it's okay, right? It's okay. You just, from that point you're at in the classroom, you still provide the emotional support, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. We feel, this is the neuroscience behind it. We feel, therefore, we learn the relevance of effective and social neuroscience to education. Learning, attention, memory, decision-making, and social functioning are both profoundly affected by and subsumed within the processes of emotion. This was just one of many brain scan studies that showed that the part of the brain responsible for academic learning is intricately tied to the part of the brain responsible for emotion. So at a physiological level, if I'm not feeling well psychologically or emotionally, I can't learn, period. It's not that I have an attitude. You need an attitude adjustment. Can't do that. That's old school way of thinking. It's like, hey, you're going through some stuff? Yeah. Okay. Let's implement some SEO activities. Let's bring in your success coach. Right? You get in trouble, you get kicked out. Sometimes that happens. It's not some security guard. It's not a school resource officer that comes pick you up. It's not a detention officer. It's a success coach. And that success coach works with that child on restorative justice so that the teacher doesn't have to, because they got lots of other students to work with. And that's how we implement change. Okay, so to conclude, I'm going to show you a video, it's only 3 minutes, of a program we implemented with kind of all of these strategies in mind. You see, young people, sometimes your families struggle. And sometimes in that struggle, you find unhealthy ways to forget about that struggle. To deal with that struggle. Drugs, the streets, the hustle, abuse, self-abuse, self-hate, self-doubt, not believing in yourself, not signing up for this great program. You know what? School is not about just you. It's about your familia that has struggled. It's about your community and bringing your community up. And this is one of your opportunities to do it.
Staying out of gangs, that would be the most difficult because, I don't know, like, being out of there is not that easy, you know, because you may have stopped, but your enemies always remember you, always remember who you are, your face, so, like, you can't change that. You may got enough of that lifestyle, but, like, your enemies are still there. They're gonna forget about you. To me, I look at the street life as a sport. It was a sport because, I don't know, a lot of things you do, but at the same time, you put your life in risk.
3, 2, 1, go!
Come on, try to put your feet over. Come on. Hey, don't grab this rope, William.
Hey man, I can't do this.
Yeah, you can do it. Hey, lift up your left leg. Yeah, grab on from it and lift up your left leg.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's go, William. 3 feet, that's it, William. 3 feet, baby.
3 feet. Come on. Just take 3 steps. 3 steps, bro. Just 3 steps.
Espérate, güey. Bájate, madre.
You got it.
There you go.
Hold the rope, baby.
You got
Just
walk.
got you.
Walk.
It's got you. Hold the rope and just walk, baby.
2 more steps. 2 more steps.
Let's go.
Just keep walking. You got it.
Do it, baby.
Just focus on the rope.
There you go, William.
Walk, baby. You got it. Just
You gotta
walk.
walk, babe. You gotta walk.
Come on, William. You got it. I got this shit. You got it, baby. I love it. Man, bro, I love it.
There you go.
You got it. You got it, bro.
Nah, hell no.
I'm about to hop over that way 'cause my leg won't spit out that. Okay, so in conclusion, we have to create a continuum of care where everyone's held accountable. It's a shared responsibility. My teacher believed in me so much that she tricked me into believing in myself. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. I'm honored. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.